right, let's start talking about our next assignment, which are instruction sets. So, assignment 2, our task is going to be to create an instruction set for one specific technical process for a technical program, machinery or scientific equipment you are familiar with. Now, I want to specify here, you also have to have access to it, because a vital component of instruction sets are to have images demonstrating the different steps. So be sure that it's not only something that you can explain, but you have access to the program or equipment, because you're going to either need several screenshots to demonstrate the steps, or you're going to have to show them step by step. So just be sure that as you're thinking about what you want your set to be on, that you have access to either the software or the equipment. Now, your topic should fit the format, how to perform X process using X device. So I don't care what the technical device is. It could be CAD software, Photoshop, web design, Excel, a Bunsen burner, geological surveying tool. I don't care what it is. It just needs to be a set that you're explaining how to do some process that uses some kind of technical device. Now, I also want to specify that this process needs to be complex enough that it does require at least 8 steps and would have sub-steps, but it does not need to be hyper technical. In fact, you don't want to go too far out to where you're going to have a 30-page manual. So as you're thinking about what you'd like to do your set on, think about how you want it to be complex enough that you have, that it requires steps, but not so complicated that it's going to be more than you can handle in the allotted amount of time. So let's go through and bring this to the ground and look for some good ideas and not so good ideas. So here are some good ideas that have come from some of my past classes. So how to create a simulation of a water flow in Flowmaster, how to cut different pieces of wood using a table saw, how to measure distances using a dial caliper, how to use a miter saw, how to screen print a t-shirt, how to take a 3D object file, format it for printing, and finally print it, how to use VBA Excel, how to print a physical 3D model of a digital 3D model on a specific kind of 3D printer. So all of these have been tackled by students in the past, and they've all been kind of the perfect link to where it is complex enough that it requires an instruction set and it can provide steps and sub-steps, but not so complex that it was kind of impossible to tackle. Some not as good ideas, try to stay away from how to check tire pressure, how to use an iPhone, how to change a tire, or how to make coffee. Now, these could be used, use an instruction set, but the problem is one, they're probably not connected to your field, and that's what I want to see, is something a little bit more connected to your field. They're a little bit too simple in some cases, like how to use an iPhone. iPhones are made to be intuitive, so let's not tackle something that's made to be intuitive. You want it to be complicated enough that it's something that you would actually do, right? It's something that actually calls for an instruction set. It makes sense that someone's writing an instruction set for it. So think of things that you've done. These should be easy, right? A program that you're using. You can think of like a process that you're using in another class right now and write an instruction set for that. Whether you're using Excel for something, you're using AutoCAD for something, think of what you're doing right now and what would lend itself to kind of 2 birds with 1 stone. You're fulfilling an assignment in another class and you're creating an instruction set in here. All right, so I pulled out a couple of really good kind of samples from previous classes that I've had that really show you like some really effective ways to tackle your instruction set. So you want to use all the resources at command, so images, screen capture, videos if you can. And now images are really important for any instruction set. So you'll see here, these are two different instruction sets from two different classes actually. And I chose this because of the way they've utilized images and also the way they've kind of structured their entire instruction set. So they've used a little bit of color in this one, red, to call out the main steps. Very helpful. So users can immediately see like these key action items. And notice how they say determine the size of tap needed. Then they have insert the tap into handle or wrench. So they're starting their steps with action items. And it's a short, simple action item step. Then they have warnings and kind of sub-steps or additional information set apart in these grayed out boxes. The warning is all caps, it's bolded. And then let's look at how they use this image. Now notice, first of all, they have it labeled and captioned, so it's figure 12, and they explain what it is. Look at how this student actually also used a red box to really zero in on what they're calling attention to in this step. And then the steps are, clearly marked out, and we have uniformity in the way our sub-steps come in these boxes. Now, see this one, the student took a photo and then used the photo here. Here we have someone doing a computer program. And so they have screenshots and they demonstrate exactly what the screen will look like in these steps. Now you'll see in this one how they've done it a little bit differently. They do steps in black, but they put the actual step underneath it to kind of create that separation and draw attention to the different steps. So you'll see again, click file, sketch a circle. So again, these are quick one action items that are clear steps, and then they'll have additional information below them. This student decided to put the additional information in italics to set it apart from that main action item. So this is a really great way of utilizing the different ways that you can kind of format instruction sets, but you see they do them a little bit differently. Both are effective. Also notice how they use their images, they call attention to certain things, they have the blue highlighted there with what they need to do, and most importantly, they have their figures labeled. So those are just a couple of examples to think about as you're structuring your own instruction set. Now, here's a what not to do. So these are not from my students. These are just some instruction sets I found from the internet. So these are things we want to avoid. First of all, this is an image with about 14 steps thrown into one. They have taken several different steps that need to be mapped out and made it one step and just thrown the images right there. That's too many in one. Do not do that. That is using one image to do too much work at one time, and that is not going to be helpful. So be sure that you're marking out step by step things that need to happen, and that you're zeroing in on the image in an effective way that shows the different steps one at a time and doesn't assume that you can just throw 7 steps into one, okay? And on the right side here, this is our what not to do. Nothing can be more boring than this instruction set right here, and you'll probably note that there are no images, it has no design elements to it, steps are not marked out and easy to find, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. They're big blocks of text for everyone instead of being an action item with sub-steps, somehow kind of formatted in a different way to separate the two. So this is another don't do. You do not want something that reads like a boring essay, right? Instruction sets need images, they need action items, they need color, they need warnings. So we want to avoid either putting too many steps in one and using an image in such a bulk way, or something as bland and dry as no images at all and just big blocks of text. Neither of those are going to be effective. Our reading notes that it is difficult to get people to pay attention or to read the instruction set anyway. This is not going to convince people to read. This is not going to get people's attention, so let's avoid that. All right, so here is another example that I just pulled off the internet, and this is looking better, right? They use design a little bit more. We have different sizes of font to kind of help our main action items stand out. They have images to show us what this looks like. This has arrows to show us what the movement should be like. They offer more detail and giving lengths. So these are looking better. Now, I would say that these could even be improved, but this is a much better take on instruction sets than the ones we just saw. All right, so testing. Here is something that is key to this assignment. Before you submit your instruction set, you're going to test them in 2 different ways. So first of all, you're going to walk through the instruction set yourself. So you're going to go through and kind of do, you know, a self walkthrough. You're going to go through it and try to, as much as you can, distance yourself, right? You know the process, you know what it needs. But try to distance yourself. Notice if you're like taking steps that aren't included in the instruction set, or if it's something that maybe needs an image, it needs to be broken down a little bit more. That's going to help you do your first round of revisions. Now, the most important is you're going to watch someone else, a friend, a roommate, a classmate, walk through the technology. You're going to actually gather notes, and that's going to be part of this assignment. So be sure as you do this, you have a camera and you're taking pictures of the testing subject do it, that you're taking notes or recording them so you can use quotes to help you figure out what's working and what's not working. Most importantly, this person needs to be someone that is either in the target audience, the kind of person that would actually use this instruction set. The less they're familiar with it, the better as well. So you want someone, imagine, best case scenario is imagine if you're doing something, you're explaining how to use a certain program. Imagine you're explaining this program to a brand new freshman who is maybe a little bit familiar with the program, but not what they're doing, or is just becoming familiar with the program. So if you're doing something, don't ask a roommate that is also a senior that knows how to do the program well, how to do it. They're not going to see the problems the way someone who actually has to follow it verbatim to figure out what they're doing will. So it's going to be the least the person that is testing it knows about the program, the better. That's really going to show you where your flaws are. That's really going to help you revise and make a better instruction set. So think about that as you are figuring out who you want to test. All right, so in addition to the instruction set themselves, you're going to turn in a user persona, which is included in your assignment sheet, which again, you're going to read thoroughly. I've included in the assignment sheet and in the readings in our modules, these helpful user persona readings that are going to help you figure out what our persona is, why we use them, and how we put them together. And then you're also going to provide me proof of data collection from your testing subject. So I just talked about that. That's why you're going to gather quotes, you're going to have photos, you're going to include reflections, what went well, what didn't, what are you going to change based on that. So I am not super picky with what these look like. But I do want to see images of the person doing it so I can see that you tested it. I do want to see quotes that kind of demonstrate what went well and what didn't. And I'd like to see your reflections, but these are just notes, right? Don't worry about the formality of it. I'm not really concerned about it. I just want to see that you tested it. I want proof of that. And I want to see like what changes you decided to make based on that. All right, so let's talk about the layout. So your instruction set is going to follow the basic layout outlined in the Anderson reading that I've provided. So it's going to have an introduction and a background, a list of materials, a list of steps and sub-steps. It's going to have a troubleshooting section and then a glossary of key terms and definitions. So those more jargony terms are going to be defined in a glossary. If you are doing something a little bit more common sense, you might not have that glossary of key terms and definitions, but the best projects are going to have those because you're picking something that's specific to your field, so you're going to need those. All right, so let's look at a kind of quick breakdown of what these are going to include. So an introduction, or what they need to do. Intro and background, so you need to answer the questions. What will these instruction sets help me do? Is there anything I need to know to be able to use these instructions effectively? So this section needs to include the subject, purpose of procedure, the intended readers, the scope of the instruction set, what all is it going to show us how to do, the organization, explain kind of how the organization of the instruction set is laid out, the conventions, the motivation to read, and safety. Motivation and safety are part of persuasion. So again, our readings explain that we have to be persuasive as we write these because we have to get people to actually read them, and that's where motivation and safety come in. Next, you're going to have a list of materials. So this is a really good place to use images, especially if these are kind of really unique to the field or to the process. So are there special things to pay attention to collect when performing the experiment? Where do they gather the materials? Are there certain tools that are needed? What are they and what do they look like? So list of materials speaks for itself, right? It's a list of stuff that you need to do whatever procedure it is that you're doing. Then main part, list of steps and sub-steps. Once I'm ready to start, what do I do? So be sure that this is written for scanning and rapid comprehension, that the main steps are action-oriented headings, and that they branch out into kind of those sub-steps clearly. So there's some kind of, like, we go back to the example I gave you, we see that this main step is here, it's action-oriented, and then it branches out to sub-steps or warnings. So you want to be sure that that is going on, that it's clearly demarcated. And then make sure that you have notes, that the warnings somehow stand out, and you're also noting what might go wrong in specific steps and how to fix that. And then you're going to have a troubleshooting guide. So something that it might be common to happen, obstacles you can predict, things that could go wrong or that are common to go wrong and how they can fix them. And finally, a glossary of key terms, which is pretty self-explanatory. Key terms that you might have to use that the reader might not know. You can also put in this section any helpful websites or resources that the reader can use to better understand the process that they're doing. All right, so here are some helpful steps to writing instruction sets. So first of all, users. You have to think of your users first and foremost. Consider who they are, what their goals are, and think about, this is where you're going to use your persona. What do they know? What do they need to know? What kind of obstacles might they face based on their level of knowledge, based on what they want out of the process? The users have to be in focus the entire time. You're going to start by pre-writing. So before you get into, getting into breaking down the steps and thinking about the images, write down the steps as you think that they should occur just off the top of your head. So go through a quick pre-write. This is going to change as you get into it. This helps you kind of figure out how to tackle it to begin with, though. And then you're going to do a process analysis. So perform the process yourself and then add to those pre-writing notes that you have. What steps didn't you put in? Where do you need to put sub-steps to those main steps? What processes did you forget about as you were doing it because you're so used to it? So go through it yourself and add to those notes. Sorry about that. Then you'll get into more detailed instructions, thinking of every small detail, how you might use group steps and sub-steps, how are you going to create that visual hierarchy, how will you use numbers, bullets, and headings. So you go back and see how those two instruction sets I showed you use those differently, right? Some of them put the steps in red, others just bold them and then put the action step under it. The second set italicized their sub-steps, the other one put them in like a shadow box, right? So think about how you want to break those apart and where you need to break those apart. This will be the step that you add visuals as well. So the trickier steps where you need to label and offer an image for a step or zero in on inner working pieces, break pieces down into parts or summarize the steps. So think about where you need to add, right? Where they need to see what's going on to really grasp it. And then you want to create the other parts of the document after you have all that, right? So get your main instruction set down, and then you can think about your introduction, your list of materials and the images, and then your kind of troubleshooting guide. You're going to figure out your troubleshooting guide a lot also as you're working through the steps. And then finally, you're going to test them. You need to test your set, see what's working, see what's not. Go through it yourself, then have someone else, like I said, do that to see when it's not someone who's so close to it, how well they go through it. This should be someone who doesn't know how to do the process already. All right, so here's a really important part that I want to note, because this is what I have students during the instruction set. This is usually something that's missed. Be sure, and I've noted this already, but that you are effectively using images so that they're labeled, right? There'll always be figures. If it's in images, it will be called a figure. So be sure that it has figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, and that there's a caption. Don't just say figure 1, tell me what it is, right? And then you also need to reference that in the actual step, as seen in figure 1, as seen in figure 2. So be sure you're making both of those moves. Be sure that the figures are applicable to what's going on, that you've zoomed in enough, that they're clear, that they're big enough but not too big. And then remember, as far as formatting goes, make sure that they all have a number or table title. So it will be figure 1 or table 1. Make sure that they have a caption. So don't just show me a picture, explain what it is, what's going on in it, and then make sure you have that in-text reference, like I said, as seen in figure 1, as seen in figure 2. So those are the key elements to this. I'll keep giving you tips along the way, but these are the main things that we need to know to get going on this, or to get going on this. And remember, if you have any questions at all, please email me or come and see me.